the endless storm. It was my freshman year of high school in 2012, and I remember that stormy day like it was yesterday. The rain was pouring down so hard that it looked like night even though it was the middle of the afternoon. I was always a bit nervous about gym class, but that day it was even worse because our regular teacher was out, and we had a substitute. His name was Mr. Peters, and right from the start he gave me the creeps. He was an older man with gray hair and these piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through you. Gym was never my favorite. I preferred the music room, where I felt safe with Mr. Thompson, our band teacher. He was always encouraging me to play more and get better. But gym? I hated it. I guess it's because I wasn't very athletic. I always felt out of place among the other kids, who seemed to love running around and getting sweaty. That day, when Mr. Peters called out attendance, he stared at me a bit too long. It made me uncomfortable, but I tried to shrug it off. He's just a weird old man, I told myself. Don't let it bother you. But it did. The whole class, I felt his eyes on me. After gym, I went to the locker room. That's when things started to get really weird. I had forgotten my locker combination. I stood there, fumbling with the lock, growing more and more frustrated. Suddenly, Mr. Peters was right there behind me. "Need some help with that?" he asked, his voice way too close for comfort. "And no, I got it," I stammered, but he stepped closer, his presence suffocating. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said, his hand brushing against mine as he took the lock. His touch made my skin crawl. Just then, the lights flickered and went out. The whole school was plunged into darkness. My heart was racing. I could hear the rain pounding on the roof and Mr. Peters' heavy breathing next to me. "I've got a flashlight in the basement storage room," he said, sounding oddly calm. "Follow me." Something inside me screamed not to follow him, but I was scared and felt trapped. My mind flashed back to 2 years ago when my older brother died in an accident. He was my protector, and without him, I felt so vulnerable. Since his death, I've had this deep fear of being alone and trusting strangers. But I knew I had to get away from Mr. Peters. "No, I think I'll just wait here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Suit yourself," he said, but there was something menacing in his tone. He walked away, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I decided to head to the music room. Mr. Thompson was always there after school, and I felt safe with him. As I made my way through the dark halls, I kept thinking about how weird Mr. Peters was. Why did he stare at me like that? Why did he say I reminded him of someone? I finally reached the music room and knocked on the door. "Mr. Thompson, it's James. Can I come in?" "Sure, James, come on in," he said, opening the door. "What's up? You look like you've seen a ghost." "It's the substitute gym teacher, Mr. Peters," I said, my voice shaky. "He's really creepy. He was too close to me in the locker room, and then the lights went out." Mr. Thompson frowned. "I've heard some things about him. Just stay here for a bit, okay? I'll keep an eye out." I felt a bit better, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread. Sitting in the music room with Mr. Thompson made me feel a bit safer, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The storm outside was getting worse. The wind howled, and the rain slammed against the windows like it was trying to get inside. The whole school felt eerily quiet, except for the occasional creak or groan from the old building. Mr. Thompson tried to distract me by talking about music. "James, you've been making great progress with your trumpet. Have you considered joining the jazz band?" I nodded, trying to focus. "Yeah, maybe. I like jazz." But my mind was elsewhere, replaying the encounter with Mr. Peters over and over. As we talked, I noticed something strange. The music room, usually so organized, had a few things out of place. A chair was knocked over, and some sheet music was scattered on the floor. It wasn't like Mr. Thompson to leave things messy. "Did something happen here?" I asked, pointing at the scattered papers. Mr. Thompson glanced over, looking puzzled. That's odd. I didn't leave it like that. A shiver ran down my spine. I tried to brush it off, but it felt like another piece of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. Just then the power flickered again, and the room plunged into darkness. My heart raced. "Don't worry, it's just the storm," Mr. Thompson said, though I could hear the tension in his voice. He fumbled for a flashlight and turned it on, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. I felt a strange sense of unease, like we were being watched. The flashlight beam danced around the room, highlighting the disarray. That's when I noticed it, a small, crumpled piece of paper under a desk. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It was a combination list for the gym lockers. "Where did you find that?" Mr. Thompson asked, his voice low and serious. "Under the desk," I replied, my throat dry. "Why would this be here?" Mr. Thompson's face tightened. "I don't know, but let's keep it for now. We'll ask about it later." We sat in silence for a while, the storm raging outside. Every sound seemed amplified. The dripping of water, the creaking of the floorboards, the distant rumble of thunder. My mind kept drifting back to Mr. Peters. Why did he have a combination list? And why did it end up here? "I think I should head home," I finally said. "I don't feel safe here." Mr. Thompson nodded. "I understand. Let's wait until the storm eases up a bit. I'll walk you to the front." We gathered our things, and just as we were about to leave, we heard a noise. It was faint but unmistakable, a dragging sound coming from the hallway. My blood ran cold. "Stay here," Mr. Thompson whispered, his face pale. He stepped out into the hallway, leaving me alone in the dimly lit room. I waited, every second feeling like an eternity. The dragging sound grew louder, closer. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to stay out of sight. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Mr. Thompson stepped back in, his face grim. "We need to go," he said urgently. "Now." I didn't ask questions. We hurried down the hall, the sound of our footsteps echoing. As we passed the basement stairwell, I glanced down and saw something that made my stomach churn. A shadowy figure moving slowly in the darkness, dragging something heavy behind them. "Keep moving," Mr. Thompson urged, his voice strained. We reached the front entrance, and he pushed the door open. The wind and rain hit us like a wall, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. "James, go straight home and tell your parents everything," Mr. Thompson said. "I'll take care of this." I nodded, too scared to argue. As I ran out into the storm, I glanced back and saw Mr. Peters standing at the entrance, watching me with those piercing blue eyes. The sight of him, standing there like a predator watching his prey, would haunt me for years to come. I ran all the way home, the rain mixing with my tears. I felt like I was running from something evil, something human but twisted beyond recognition. When I got home, I was soaked to the bone and trembling. My parents could see something was wrong immediately. "James, what happened?" my mom asked, her voice full of concern. I took a deep breath and told them everything. Mr. Peters, the combination list, the creepy dragging sound. I could see the worry in their eyes, but they tried to stay calm for my sake. "We're going to the school first thing tomorrow," my dad said firmly. "This needs to be reported." That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mr. Peters' face, heard that dragging sound, felt his hand on my shoulder. I kept thinking about my brother and how he used to protect me. Without him, I felt lost and vulnerable. My mind was a whirlpool of fear and confusion. The next morning, my parents and I went to the principal's office. Mr. Thompson was already there, looking just as concerned as I felt. "James, I've talked to the principal about what happened," Mr. Thompson said. "They're taking this very seriously." Principal Anderson, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes, nodded. "James, we're going to get to the bottom of this. Thank you for coming forward." They called in Mr. Peters for questioning. As we waited outside the office, my anxiety skyrocketed. I kept expecting him to burst out and come after me. Finally, after what felt like hours, Principal Anderson came out. "Mr. Peters has been placed on leave while we investigate. You did the right thing, James." But even as she said it, I saw a shadow of doubt in her eyes. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this, something deeper and darker. Days passed, and I tried to get back to my normal routine, but it was impossible. The fear lingered, always just beneath the surface. One afternoon, Mr. Thompson pulled me aside after band practice. "James, I need to show you something," he said quietly. We walked down to the basement, and my heart pounded with every step. When we reached the storage room, he pointed to a metal container that had been hidden behind some old equipment. "I found this after you left that day," he said, his voice tense. "I didn't open it until now because I wanted to wait for the right moment." He pried the container open, and my stomach turned. Inside were old, worn-out clothes, a set of keys, and a stack of photographs. The pictures showed young boys, all around my age, looking scared and uncomfortable. My blood ran cold. "These boys? They look like?" I started, but couldn't finish the sentence. "Yes," Mr. Thompson said grimly. "They look like you. We need to take this to the principal right away." As we walked back, my mind was racing. Who were those boys? What had happened to them? My fear of Mr. Peters deepened into something more, a fear of the unknown horrors he might have committed. In the principal's office, we showed Principal Anderson the contents of the container. She looked horrified. "We'll notify the police immediately," she said. "James, you're very brave for coming forward." Days turned into weeks, and the investigation revealed a shocking truth. Mr. Peters had been involved in several cases of missing boys over the years. He had a history of working at different schools, always leaving under suspicious circumstances. The boys in the photos were never found, but the evidence pointed to him being responsible. The police found more incriminating evidence in his home, a hidden room with more photos, belongings of the missing boys, and detailed notes about each one. The combination list in the music room was part of his twisted game, his way of keeping track of his potential victims. Mr. Peters was arrested and charged with multiple counts of abduction and other heinous crimes. As the truth came out, I felt a mixture of relief and horror. He was finally caught, but the scars he left on his victims, on me, would never fully heal. In the end, the stormy day that started it all was just the beginning. It revealed the depths of human evil, the kind that hides in plain sight, wearing a friendly face. As I moved forward, I held on to the memory of my brother, using his strength to face my fears. I knew I had to stay vigilant, not just for myself, but for those who couldn't speak out. Shadows at Castle Rock. When I first walked into Castle Rock Classical Academy, I was just hoping for a fresh start. My name is Alex, and I was a new junior, having transferred from my old school because of some pretty bad bullying. Castle Rock looked like it could be a new beginning. The buildings were grand, and it felt like stepping into another world. But honestly, I was nervous as hell. Lunchtimes were the hardest. I sat alone in the cafeteria, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes on me. Everyone seemed to have their groups, their cliques, and there I was, just trying to blend into the background. I would usually eat quickly, and then hide out in the library. It felt safer there among the books, where no one could judge me. One day, as I was sitting in my usual spot, poking at my food, 2 guys approached me. They were identical twins, Jeff and Mike. They had these bright, welcoming smiles, and looked like they belonged to one of those popular groups. "Hey, you're Alex, right? I'm Jeff, and this is Mike. Mind if we join you?" Jeff said, smiling. "Sure," I replied, trying not to sound too eager. They sat down, and we started talking. They were friendly, cracking jokes and making me feel included. For the first time since I got to Castle Rock, I didn't feel invisible. Over the next few days, we started hanging out more. They showed me around the school, introduced me to some other students, and it was like things were finally looking up. But then there was Sarah. She was a senior, a bit of an outcast herself, known for being a little weird. One day, she cornered me in the hallway. "You need to be careful around Jeff and Mike," she said, her eyes serious. "They're not what they seem." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused and a bit annoyed. I finally had friends, and here she was trying to ruin it. "Just watch your back, okay?" she said before walking away. I brushed it off, but her words stuck with me. Still, I ignored the warning. Jeff and Mike were the only friends I had, and they were nice to me. One evening, they invited me to hang out after school. They suggested meeting at the old cemetery near the school. It sounded a bit creepy, but they said it was cool, like an adventure. "Are you sure it's safe?" I asked, trying to hide my nervousness. "Of course, we've done it a bunch of times," Mike said, grinning. "It's just for fun." Against my better judgment, I agreed. I didn't want to seem like a coward, and besides, I was desperate to fit in. That night, I left my house and headed towards the cemetery, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. The night was colder than I expected. The moon cast long shadows across the cemetery, and the trees whispered in the wind. I pulled my jacket tighter around me as I made my way through the woods towards the small lake Jeff and Mike had mentioned. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig made me jump. I told myself it was just my imagination, but my instincts screamed otherwise. When I reached the edge of the cemetery, I saw Jeff and Mike waiting by the lake, their faces illuminated by the pale moonlight. They waved, and I forced a smile, trying to push down the unease bubbling inside me. "Glad you made it," Jeff said, clapping me on the back. "This place is pretty cool at night, huh?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. We wandered around the cemetery, talking and laughing, but something felt off. I noticed the way the twins moved, almost too synchronized, and their eyes seemed to glint with something I couldn't quite place. At one point, Jeff stopped and looked at me, his expression suddenly serious. "You know, this place has a lot of history. Some pretty dark stuff happened here." "Like what?" I asked, curiosity and a hint of dread creeping into my voice. "People used to say this cemetery is haunted," Mike said, a smirk playing on his lips. "But it's not ghosts you need to worry about." Before I could ask what he meant, Jeff changed the subject, leading us deeper into the woods. The trees grew thicker, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out the moonlight. The air felt heavier, colder. We reached a small clearing by the lake. The water was still, reflecting the moon like a mirror. It should have been peaceful, but the silence was oppressive, almost suffocating. "Let's sit here for a while," Jeff suggested, dropping to the ground. Mike and I followed suit. The ground was damp and cold, sending a shiver through me. As we sat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. My mind kept flashing back to Sarah's warning. I glanced around, my eyes straining to see through the darkness. That's when I noticed it, a small, weathered gravestone at the edge of the clearing. It was old, barely readable, but I could make out the name Sarah carved into the stone. "Hey guys, did you know there's a gravestone with Sarah's name over there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, there are a lot of Sarahs," Jeff said dismissively. "Probably just a coincidence, but it didn't feel like one." My unease grew with every passing minute. The night seemed to stretch on, and the cold seeped into my bones. Then, out of nowhere, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just the darkness and the trees. My heart pounded in my chest, and I tried to laugh it off, but it came out as a nervous chuckle. "What's wrong, Alex? Scared of the dark?" Mike teased, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Just a bit jumpy, I guess," I muttered. We sat in silence for a while longer, the tension in the air growing thicker. I kept glancing over my shoulder, every shadow seeming to shift and move. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and I couldn't shake the sense that we weren't alone. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Maybe we should head back. It's getting late," I suggested, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. Jeff and Mike exchanged a look, then nodded. "Yeah, let's go," Jeff said, standing up. As we made our way back through the woods, I stayed close to the twins, my nerves on edge. Every step felt like it echoed in the darkness, the surrounding silence almost deafening. I kept expecting something to jump out at us, my imagination running wild. When we finally reached the edge of the cemetery, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The lights of the town in the distance felt like a lifeline, pulling me out of the darkness. "See you tomorrow, Alex?" Jeff said, a strange smile on his face. "Yeah, see you," I replied, hurrying away. As I walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much darker. The night's events replayed in my mind, each unsettling detail etching itself deeper into my thoughts. The next day at school, I felt like I was in a haze. The events of the previous night played over and over in my mind. Every time I saw Jeff and Mike, a chill ran down my spine. I tried to avoid them, but it was impossible. They always seemed to find me, their presence unsettling. "Hey, Alex, you all right?" Jeff asked during lunch, his eyes boring into mine. "Yeah, I just didn't sleep well," I replied, trying to sound casual. "We were thinking of hanging out again tonight," Mike said, grinning. "Same place?" My stomach churned. The last thing I wanted was to go back to that cemetery. "I don't know, guys. I've got a lot of homework," I lied. Jeff's smile faded. "Come on, Alex. Don't flake on us now." I could see the insistence in their eyes, but my fear was stronger. "Maybe another time," I said, standing up to leave. "I'll catch you later." As I walked away, I could feel their eyes on my back, and the unease gnawed at me. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to talk to someone, anyone, about what was happening. After school, I found Sarah sitting alone in the library. Summoning my courage, I approached her. "Sarah, can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up, her eyes wary. "What's going on?" I sat down and told her everything. The cemetery, the weird behavior, the gravestone with her name. As I spoke, her expression grew more serious. "They've done this before," she said quietly. "They lure new students in, make them feel welcome, then scare them off. But it's never been this intense." "Why?" I asked, my heart pounding. "I don't know," she admitted. "But you need to be careful. They're dangerous." That night, I locked my bedroom window and double-checked the doors. My parents were out of town, and I was alone in the house. Every creak and groan of the old house made me jump. I tried to focus on my homework, but my mind kept drifting back to Jeff and Mike. Around midnight, I heard a noise downstairs. My heart raced as I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and crept down the stairs. The house was dark, and the only sound was my own breathing. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw the front door was slightly ajar. Panic surged through me. I knew I had locked it. I moved cautiously, every shadow seeming to shift and move. Then I heard it, footsteps behind me. I spun around, the bat raised, but there was no one there. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. No answer. The silence was deafening. I backed towards the kitchen, my eyes darting around the room. Then I saw it. A figure standing in the doorway, their face obscured by the darkness. "Get out of my house!" I yelled, swinging the bat. The figure lunged at me, and we grappled in the dark. I swung the bat wildly, connecting with something solid. The figure grunted in pain and fell back, giving me a chance to run. I bolted for the door, but another figure blocked my path. Jeff. His eyes were wild, a sadistic grin on his face. "Going somewhere, Alex?" Before I could react, Mike tackled me from behind, pinning me to the ground. "We told you not to flake on us," he hissed. I struggled, kicking and punching, but they were too strong. Jeff held me down while Mike rummaged through his bag, pulling out a length of rope. "Please, stop," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "Why are you doing this?" Jeff leaned in close, his breath hot on my face. "Because we can," he whispered. "Because it's fun." Just as they started tying me up, the sound of sirens filled the air. Jeff and Mike exchanged a panicked look before scrambling to their feet. They bolted out the door just as the police cars pulled up. The officers rushed in, helping me up and checking for injuries. My parents had returned home early and found the door open, calling the police. I was safe, for now. In the weeks that followed, Jeff and Mike were expelled and faced charges for their actions. But the fear never left me. I kept my windows locked and the baseball bat close. The twist came when I learned from the police that Jeff and Mike had been involved in similar incidents at their previous school, targeting vulnerable students for their twisted games. They had been expelled before, but their parents' influence had kept the incidents quiet, allowing them to start over at Castle Rock. I realized then that the real horror wasn't in ghosts or monsters, but in the cruelty humans could inflict on each other. The twins had thrived on fear and manipulation, finding joy in their victims' terror. The scars they left were deeper than physical wounds. I survived, but the experience changed me forever. The basement shadows. I recently got a job as a computer intern at my old high school. It's funny how life brings you back to places you thought you'd left behind. I'm 23, just finished college, and I never thought I'd end up working here. The basement office where I work is pretty well equipped, but super messy. It's like a junkyard of old computers, tangled wires, and random stuff everywhere. It's just me and my two coworkers, Ray and Wilson. We joke about the mess, but it's a little overwhelming. I have to admit, I have always feared the dark and closed spaces. When I was 10, I got trapped in a closet during hide and seek. It was pitch black, and I could barely breathe. That memory still haunts me, making the basement office, with its dim lighting and clutter, a bit of a challenge every day. So there I was, trying to navigate through this chaotic basement, surrounded by old desks, mini fridges, and flat-screen TVs. Ray and Wilson had gone out for lunch, and I was alone. I decided to take a break and play some games on my phone. That's when it happened. Suddenly, the school's alarm went off. It was loud and piercing, the kind that makes your heart skip a beat. The announcement came on saying there was an armed intruder on campus. I freaked out. I turned off the lights and hid under my desk, my mind racing with fear. Minutes felt like hours. I heard the basement door creak open and footsteps coming closer. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. A man walked into the office. He said he was hiding too. I couldn't see his face in the dark, but he was wearing a red plaid button-up shirt and a reddish-black cap. My phone buzzed with a text from Ray. "Intruder is wearing a red shirt and hat. Be safe." Fear gripped me as I realized the man in the office fit the description perfectly. I clenched my teeth, trying to stay silent. The man was staring at me suspiciously, making my heart race even more. I thought about my fear of dark, enclosed spaces. How ironic it was that I was hiding in the dark, under a desk, from someone who might want to hurt me. It brought back that old suffocating fear from the closet. But this time, it was much worse. This was real danger, not just a childhood game. I whispered to myself, "Stay calm, stay quiet." My hands were shaking and I could feel sweat trickling down my back. The man moved closer, and I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. I felt like I was 10 years old again, trapped and terrified. But this time there was no one to come and let me out. The man started to turn away, and for a brief moment I thought I might be safe. However, my phone buzzed again. I cursed under my breath. The noise was so loud in the silence of the basement. The man spun around, his eyes locking onto where I was hiding. My heart felt like it was going to explode. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice cold and threatening. I didn't answer, couldn't answer. I was frozen with fear. I managed to stay quiet, and after what felt like an eternity, the man left the basement. I stayed hidden for a long time, my mind racing, trying to process what had just happened. When I finally emerged, my legs were trembling. I felt a cold sweat all over my body. The silence in the basement was unnerving. Every little sound seemed amplified, echoing off the walls. Ray and Wilson returned later, and I tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Ray looked at me with a strange intensity. "Are you okay, man?" he asked, his voice unusually serious. "Yeah, just, freaked out by the lockdown," I replied, forcing a smile. Wilson laughed nervously. "Guess the basement is the safest place, huh?" But his eyes darted around the room as if expecting something to jump out at him. Days went by, but the tension didn't ease. The basement, with its constant hum of old computers and flickering lights, seemed more ominous than ever. I started noticing odd things. Items in the office were being moved or disappearing entirely. One day, I couldn't find my notebook. The next, a stack of old monitors was suddenly in a different corner. It was unsettling, like the basement had a life of its own. Ray and Wilson seemed off too. They whispered to each other more, their conversations stopping abruptly when I walked in. One evening, Ray approached me with a look I couldn't quite read. "Listen, about that lockdown, just be careful, okay? Stay away from the old server room. It's best you don't know." His words were cryptic, planting a seed of doubt and curiosity in my mind. "What's in there?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Nothing you need to worry about," Ray said, his tone final. But his eyes didn't meet mine, and that made me more uneasy. The basement had its own set of sounds, constant humming from the servers, the occasional drip of water somewhere deep in the walls, and the creaking of the old buildings settling. But now, these sounds seemed more sinister. I started hearing whispers, faint and indistinct, like voices carried on a draft. My mind was playing tricks on me, or at least that's what I told myself. One particularly unsettling evening, I was alone in the office. Ray and Wilson had left early, saying they had things to take care of. I was working late, trying to finish a report. The air conditioning was on, but it felt stifling. The lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows. I could smell the musty scent of old books mixed with the metallic tang of the servers. Then I heard it, a faint rustling noise, like someone shifting through papers. I looked up, heart pounding, but saw nothing, just the usual clutter of the office. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I got up to stretch, my nerves on edge. As I walked around, I noticed a drawer slightly open. Inside, there were old photos, papers, and a small, dusty journal. Curiosity got the better of me, and I flipped through it. The journal belonged to Mr. Miller, the teacher who had been shot. It was filled with notes about students, projects, and something darker. There were entries about feeling threatened, about someone watching him. I closed the journal quickly, my hands shaking. The basement suddenly felt colder, more oppressive. I decided to leave, to get some fresh air and clear my head. As I reached the door, I heard a whisper, clear as day, "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, but the room was empty. I bolted up the stairs, my heart racing. Outside, the cool night air hit me, but the chill in my bones didn't fade. Something was very wrong, and I was determined to find out what it was, even if it meant facing my deepest fears. My curiosity turned into obsession. The unsettling details I'd noticed, the moved items, the whispers, Ray's warning, kept gnawing at me. The basement had become a maze of mysteries, and I was determined to find the truth. But as I dug deeper, I began to see cracks in Ray and Wilson's seemingly friendly demeanor. One afternoon, I confronted Ray. "What's going on, Ray? What aren't you telling me?" Ray sighed heavily, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. "Just drop it, okay? It's not your concern." But his voice wavered, and I could see the fear in his eyes. Wilson was no better. He became increasingly paranoid, jumping at every sound. "You need to stop asking questions, man," he said one day, his eyes darting around the room. "It's safer that way." Their behavior only fueled my determination. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were hiding something important, something dangerous. The old server room seemed like the key to all the secrets. One evening, I waited until Ray and Wilson had left. The building was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the servers. I made my way to the old server room, heart pounding. The door was locked, but I had found an old key in Mr. Miller's journal hidden in a back drawer. The lock clicked open, and I stepped inside. The room was cold and dark, filled with dusty old equipment. My flashlight's beam revealed stacks of files, old hard drives, and more journals. As I rummaged through them, a chilling picture began to form. Mr. Miller had been investigating something, illegal activities, shady dealings, but he had been silenced before he could expose it. Suddenly, the door behind me slammed shut. I spun around to see Ray standing there, his face twisted in anger. "I told you to stay out," he snarled. "Ray, what's going on? What did Mr. Miller find?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Ray's expression softened for a moment, then hardened again. "He found out too much, just like you. He couldn't leave it alone, and look what happened to him." I realized with horror that Ray was more involved than I'd imagined. "You knew. You were part of it." Ray stepped closer, blocking the exit. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. But once you're in, there's no getting out." Desperation surged through me. "Ray, you don't have to do this. We can go to the police. Tell them everything." Ray shook his head. "It's too late for that." He pulled out a gun, the same cold look in his eyes that I'd seen him in the basement during the lockdown. Before I could react, Wilson burst into the room. "Ray, stop. This isn't what we signed up for." Ray turned the gun on Wilson. "You too, Wilson. Are you going to betray me now?" In the chaos, I lunged at Ray, knocking the gun from his hand. We struggled, the confined space making it difficult to move. Wilson grabbed the gun, aiming it at Ray. "Enough, Ray. It's over." Ray laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You think it's that easy? We're all in too deep." At that moment, the door burst open, and police officers flooded the room. They'd been tipped off by Mr. Miller's notes, which I had scanned and sent anonymously earlier. Ray and Wilson were both arrested, their secrets finally exposed. As I stood there, watching them being taken away, a wave of relief washed over me. But there was also a lingering sadness. These were my friends, or so I thought. The evil that people are capable of, the betrayal. It was more horrifying than any dark closet or basement shadow. Later, as I left the building for the last time, I reflected on everything that had happened. The darkness in the basement wasn't just about the lack of light. It was about the secrets, the lies, and the human capacity for evil. The real horror wasn't in the shadows themselves, but in what they concealed.